Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Chris Lester here. I'm your speaker and presenter today for our weekly chat with Chris. We've been doing these calls since the COVID environment first came upon us, and we were over 6 months into a COVID-19 environment. Every week, we do these calls in an effort to bring important information to the forefront. And because I work with a collective group of advisors referred to as the Eagle Team, whether you're dealing with me or dealing with an advisor on this call and they've invited you as a guest, collectively our belief is that if we can educate you along the way on how things work, you can make better decisions on how to plan for you and your family. So the reason for this topic, how to pay for college, I own a college planning practice. And in my career, I've come across many different scenarios. And what I ultimately concluded is that there's really two different phases of college planning. What we're going to talk about today is the early stage of college planning. So if you have a student or a grandchild that is between the year 0 and I would say 12 years old, 13 years old, that you would fall into the category of early college planning strategies and can utilize those for your benefit. I also built my practice on late stage college planning for parents that have gotten up to the front steps of colleges only to realize that it's very expensive and maybe they haven't saved enough. So today we're going to talk about the best ways to save and pay for college and try and be neutral in our suggestions, because it really depends on the family dynamic. So without further ado, I think the first thing we should start off with is, what does college cost? I did this research in preparation for one of my clients recently had a granddaughter. And they said they wanted to put some money away for their granddaughter and weren't quite certain how to do so. So what I found interesting is college has grown even more exponentially than I had originally anticipated. I used to, just a few short years ago, used to think that Princeton at $70,000 a year, oh my God, how can anybody afford that? But now you can see that even schools that aren't considered Ivies are in excess of $70,000 a year. So Rutgers on this screen, if you're in state, really does probably provide the best value locally, and it's a great school. But students, when they're younger, have no idea where they are going to go to school, and we don't know. And so I think that when we start to look at planning on how to pay for college, we have to understand A, what it costs, and then B, the environments that we're going to save money for. So what I did here, this is one of my students, this family. I've helped all 3 of their students approach college, pay for college without going broke. And mom and dad, for the first student, the student ultimately went to Rutgers. This is the second student. So the second student, this column here is a combination of tuition and room and board. So as you can see, the actual cost in 2017, 2018, I don't pick colleges. What I do is help the students to create a roadmap with a selection process and a filtration process, eliminate schools that maybe they really aren't a good fit for, and to actually apply to schools where they're a top candidate. So this schools here is just for tuition, room and board, not including fees. So this is what we refer to as retail. And this was for this family. They had saved some money, but not enough, and it was now the second student. Now, the student ultimately ended up going to Rutgers, but I want you to see that some of the other schools made significant offers, right? So Loyola at $28,000, that's a coupon or a discount that would have come off the retail price had the student elected to go there. But because the student's brother went there, and because in this case, Rutgers, who very rarely gives awards, ended up giving the daughter $3,500 off of then the total being $29,000, the family absolutely considered this a home run, because they had budgeted $50,000 to $60,000 a year for college tuition. So for both students, and I'm now on the third student, they've done very, very well. All right, so numbers tend to sometimes be intimidating. So what I try and help people to understand is, let's put this in context. Remember that college is a 4-year stacking math problem. So each year, if it was just 1 year, it would be really simple math, right? If we were going to plan to save $60,000 a year, times 4 years, that's a $240,000 math problem for one student 18 years from now, right? I'm not even going to inflate the cost of college, even though we know it's going up. I just want you to help to put into context what this grandparents are looking at if they truly wanted to help their granddaughter be able to attend college. So the first year, $3,333 a month is roughly $300 a month. And that would take care of, if they did that each and every month, would take care of the first year. But then we have second year's tuition to consider. So the following year, they need to double that to roughly about $600 a month, and then $900 a month, and then $1,000 a month. If they did that for 18, 19, 20 years, right, as they went up to and through college, that they would have accumulated the $240,000 necessary if prices remain the same. So now that we understand the core math problem that we're facing with, and this is just for one student. So if you have two students, now we're looking at a $500,000 math problem. And as families, and this is where the late stage college planning comes in, their students are freshmen, sophomores, and juniors, and they approach colleges and are looking at that the only way that they can afford to pay that, because they haven't saved enough, is to take equity out of their house, which is usually not the best option. So what I try and help families to understand is, what is this mystery, right? Because we get all this cross information, this misinformation, this non-applicable information. The colleges will tell us one thing, the high schools will tell us another. Our neighbors say that it works this way. So what I've done is help families to differentiate or compartmentalize the information so that they understand what we're dealing with. On the left side of the slide is the formula that most of the colleges will use that are state schools. It's called the federal methodology. Now, the federal methodology takes parental assets. This is your income, all your assets, not including the home. They run it to a formula, and parental assessment is at 5.64% on the dollar. So in simple math, for every 100 grand that a family has saved, let's say in a checking account, or even a 529 at a state school, that is assessed, that's $5,640 that the family is not going to get in aid. Student assessment, right, is roughly 20%. So if you've saved money in the student's name somehow, right, not including a 529, that's 20 cents on the dollar. Or for every 100 grand that you save, that's 20 grand of lost aid. But the federal methodology does not use home equity. Now, if we go to the right side of the equation, right, or the right side of this slide, that's the institutional methodology. That's a fancy way of saying private school. So they can assess assets any way they want to, and the parental assessment is the same. So anything that they deem parental assessment is 5.64%. So the same $5,640 of lost aid. But student assessment, this is where a lot of people make mistakes, because here's the bottom line is, do we know where the student is going to go to school right now? The answer is no. So because we don't know, if they wake up and go, my student's got to go to Tufts, or my student's got to go to Carnegie Mellon, or my student's got to go to Vanderbilt, well, 529s where you've saved that money will now count against that family to 20 to 25%. So that's $20,000 to $25,000 for every 100 grand that you've done or are penalized for having done a great job. So 529s are considered as a resource of the student at institutional schools. And home equity is included in the institutional methodology. So, you know, every school is different. Every school will run a different formula. This is why it can be so confusing, because you're like, what do we do? So what I help introduce families to is help them to understand the information that's going to be requested of them when they go to apply to school. So this is what a form called the FAFSA form. And it stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. And this is the most recent version, right? So when you start to complete this information as the household or the family, right, you're going to see that the first thing that they're going to ask you about is all the assets that you have, all your investments. And they're going to say in your investment sections, parents of the student, real estate, don't include your home. But use your trust funds, your UGMAs, your UTMA accounts. Those are Unified Gift to Minors Act and Unified Trust to Minors Act, custodial accounts that you put in place for the children. Money market funds, mutual funds, CDs, stock options, bonds, securities, installment and land sales, including mortgages, held commodities. They want to know everything. And if you don't learn another thing from this call today, what I need and what I preach and what I promote on all of my college planning classes that I conduct is that colleges are a business with a capital B, and it is a billion-dollar industry. And the fundamental basic of any business is to make money. So in order, to understand this phenomenon, right, we have to understand the product that the colleges are offering. And what they're offering is higher education. That's what they're offering your family and your student. So as they're trying to help you to figure out how to buy this product that they're selling, they're gleaming and looking at your family's dynamics and actually penalizing families for having done a good job. And what do I mean by that? You've saved for college, you've paid off your debt, you put money away for retirement. That's wonderful for your family. However, it allows you and positions you to pay retail for colleges. So investments also include qualified educational benefit or education savings accounts, Coverdales, 529s, refund value of 529s. Bottom line is the 529s that were conducted and touted as these wonderful savings vehicles for college will help you from a tax perspective, but they'll hurt you from a financial aid perspective. And then what I pointed out to the family, the grandparents in this case who are my clients, 529 plans that are owned by someone other than your parents, such as grandparents, aunts, uncles, and non-custodial parents, you must include these, right? So if the child is named the beneficiary and it's intended to be used for the child, the colleges want to know about it and will penalize them depending on the category that they fall into, whether that be federal methodology or institutional methodology. So here's what they tell you, also on the form, but nobody reads it. Investments do not include the home you live in, again, for state schools, the value of cash value life insurance, ABLE accounts, retirement plans, your 401ks, your pensions, annuities, non-educational IRAs, and Keto plans. Bottom line is colleges are telling you where you can put money and not have it count against you in this formula, which is the strategies that we help families to figure out along the way. So where to save? Now the red dots versus green dots. Right? On the bottom of the page, you'll see reportable on FAFSAs is considered a red dot. Not reportable on FAFSA is considered a green dot. So then you have left and right columns. You have taxable to the left or usable tax-free on the right. So taxable, these are all the places that the colleges just told us to report anyway. So if we're saving money in what is deemed in the financial industry something called non-qualified accounts, any place that generates a 1099 INT or a 1099 DIV, someplace that you're saving money on and you're getting deemed or hit with interest every year, they want you to report that and it will be taxable. Now the colleges use a taxation formula, something called prior. So if we don't start early enough with a family in positioning assets to get the best offers from the colleges, we could be too late to the dance because the colleges have changed the rules to now ask for the last 2 years' tax returns when your students are now applying for college. So taxable accounts, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, ETFs, which are exchange traded funds, CDs, savings, real estate, precious metals, commodities. Bottom line, if you put money any place and it generates taxation, right, it's not only inefficient, but it now also counts against you. It's the worst place to save money for students. Okay, what about tax-free? The 529 is often brought up and they're touted and there's advantages to it. We're going to view those in a second. The Coverdales are the educational student accounts. The max contributions are $2,000, right? So although they were neat in concept, they're not usually utilized. I don't see them very often anymore. UGMAs and UPMAs, the Uniform Gift of Minors Act or the Uniform Trust of Minors Act. Basically what you're doing is you're putting money for the student into an account for which you're the custodian, so if you're the parent, and that could be considered either way depending on the school that we apply to. IRAs, right? So IRAs, if used to pay for college, can be used tax-free and without penalty. Roth IRAs, right? We know tax-free, and cash value life insurance. But again, the last three are the items that are not reportable in the FAFSA, and they told us so. So here's the next basic that I try and just make sure that folks understand. Why is it so important to grow and save money in a vehicle that will allow us not to interrupt compounding? Well, we've talked about this in the past, but I think a picture is worth 1,000 words. If I take $1 and I double that for 20 periods, right? So just sit here with a calculator and take $1 becomes 2, and then 2 to 4, 4 to 8. At the end of 20 periods, I'll have over $1 million. I want you to also look there at that exponential curve at year 18 and what everybody is doing unintentionally because they just have not been taught is that interrupting compounding is interrupting the most powerful force in the universe, right? Compounding interest or velocity. Right when you're starting to hit that exponential curve, 131,000 to 262, folks are going in and raiding the accounts to pay for and make a capital purchase, in this case, college. So, but here's the thing is, although this grows, nobody can invest for free. There's a cost to growing and saving money depending on the environments that we're in. So the first expense that we're going to talk about is a fee, advisory fee. So if you're saving in some type of brokerage account, and you know, listen, Dalbar has done a study, the average fee that is paid by Americans across this country is north of 2%, usually about 2.4. But let's just say that it's 2% for argument's sake. And people, you know, I will find get all wrapped around the actual about the fee that they're paying on something. And although it does interrupt compounding, now we don't have $1 million at the end of that 20-year period or 20 periods. It's now 700,000. So there is a lost opportunity cost. But here's where the biggest one is, and it's taxes. We've talked about this before. So now we don't have $1 million, we only have 220,000. That's an 80% lost opportunity cost. And that's just if we tax it at 15%, which is capital gains. So if you're sitting there and, you know, and you're day trading in your account and you think you're smarter than the average bear and your stocks are going to do so well, you could end up paying ordinary income and tax at a much higher rate. So, you know, bottom line is taxation is the villain here. It's the taxes, it's the taxes, it's the taxes, which is why tax-free environments, both for college and retirement, are so critically important. So let's look at pros and cons of our three options that can grow tax-free. 529, so on the left side of the column, we have the growth is tax-free if used for college, right? It's very important. Now, you'll see at the bottom that they changed because of the Secure Act that you can now use your 529, $10,000 a year between K and 12, right? That can be used. A gifting strategy that can be done, so the grandparents and I discussed this, so putting $15,000 a year towards any taxpayer is your right as an American citizen, right? And actually, for folks with larger estates, you can actually pre-fund that 5 years combined per grandparent. So in this example, right, if a grandparent had the means, they could take 5 years, 15 grand a year times 5 grand, 75,000 for grandma, 75 grand for grandpa, and give towards a grandchild 150,000 per grandchild if they had the resources. But is it the best move? I don't know. I just want you to understand the rules. And from a control standpoint, you can always change the beneficiary. So on a 529, if you've utilized all the resources for a 529, and then now you have a second student that you want to go to college, absolutely, we can change the beneficiary, and that account can continue to be grown and utilized tax-free. However, cons. First that we just talked about is that we're interrupting compounding. Right when we got to that exponential curve, now we've lost the ability to grow that money now and into the future. We also have limited investment choices. You must be used for qualified higher education expenses or education expenses like I talked about, right? Now, here's a little known fact. The 10% penalty that is normally associated with retirement accounts, if prior to age 59 and a half, will always apply if the funds are not used for any beneficiary. So, you know, grandma and grandpa put away money for a student that's in 10th grade, and now they turn around and a student goes to school and didn't use all the money. And now grandma and grandpa are in their 70s or 75 and decide they want to liquidate that account and use it for whatever. Any growth on that account is subject to ordinary income and a 10% penalty because it was not used for qualified higher education expenses. There is no relief because you're over age 59 and a half. And then it counts as a parental or a student asset on the FAFSA, depending on the type of school that we've gone to. Now we're going to talk about Roths. Roth IRAs can grow tax-free, right? So we know that. We have unlimited investment options. You withdraw the contributions at any time. So you can always take out your cost basis the next day if you needed to. So you have a lot of liquidity. It's not counted on the FAFSA, so that's a good thing. And we can change the beneficiaries at any time. However, again, we've interrupted compounding, but we're restricted on how much money we could put away, right? So if you want to do something for a student, they actually must earn the income. So when a student becomes 8, 9, or 10 and is eligible to actually do work, you could pay that student. If you had a company or you were creative in that respect, you could turn around and put money into a Roth, but it has to be earned income. But as we've talked about, that still won't meet the math problem that I showed earlier by putting enough money away on a regular basis to have enough for college. And you cannot withdraw the gains before age 59 and a half, except for college, disability or death without the 10% penalty. So again, although it's an idea, it can be used to a degree, it's still not the best solution. One of the things that I introduce clients to is properly structured cash value life insurance. These two sections of the code, 7702 and 72E, should not be overlooked. They're actually shown to you on the FAFSA, as I said, as a place that can grow and save money, not counted as a FAFSA. And when properly structured, we never interrupt the compounding, because when we need the money, as you're going to see here in a second, we're not ever taking money out of the contract. It's a lien against the death benefit. So the growth can be used income tax free. They use accounts that are not in the market. They're actually indexed or in a guaranteed investment account or some type of fixed account. They also have no limits on contributions, right? The only limits are usually set by the insurance company, not by the IRS. And then there's access to the cash value, liquidity, liquidity, liquidity. Having access to your funds should something happen in life. I've been doing this for almost 30 years, and I find having that type of safety mechanism in place is very important. But here's the key: no market risk. What if we could develop a strategy that right now, if the market went back and your student was going into 8th grade or 9th grade, you didn't lose 20 or 30% of the portfolio value in March when we just had this correction from COVID. It's also self-completing. I cannot emphasize this enough. I just lost a friend this week, 61 years old, freak accident, absolutely horrible. But had you followed traditional advice where you put money away and you did this for 1 year or 2 years, all you have in that account is what you put in place. Cash value has that ability to actually make whatever you wanted to happen, happen. And you can change the beneficiaries. So, properly structured cash value life insurance using these sections of the code, 7702 and 72E, is very powerful. It gives you liquidity, use, and control. The cons, you got to qualify. If you're sick, if you've had issues in the past, you've had 2 stints put in, chances are this isn't an option. We'll look at other alternatives. So understand that. Now back to understanding the math behind it, because I want to show you as a side-by-side fair comparison, because I can do either arena. If somebody says to me, hey, I want to do a 529, fine, perfect. Let's see what that'll look like. Well, the first thing is I've taken that data from the first couple of slides and built this out in one of my calculators. And then when the student got to college years, we pulled out today's fair market value of the college, or the present value of the cost of attendance, at 60 grand a year. And as you can see, I put no growth rate on it, and I put no fee. Now, I've already went over that, hey, listen, nobody can invest for free, and we're going to get a rate of return. But I wanted you to understand that this is what we built first. This is what it would look like in order to fund college in the future, assuming it costs $240,000. Now we're going to put the math behind it. So it's 6% all the way to the left is the growth rate. I averaged the cost because when I looked up 529s, they're roughly about $1,000 a year, depending on how much is in the account. So I did the first 8 years, 10 years at 1%, and the second 8 to 10 years at 0.5%. So an average of 0.75%, just to give us a realistic cost assessment inside that account. Depending on how long they hold it, because it's a 529, there's no tax implication. It's going to be assumed that it's all used for qualified higher education accounts. And we did the same thing. We pulled out the 60 grand for 4 years, and notice in this example that the client still had $176,000. Now, they were looking to fund this for their son, and their son would be 34 years. And they would still have $176,000. So if they had a second student, if they wanted to, maybe a niece or a nephew in the future, they could do that. But the point I wanted to make here was that this is an option. So if somebody either A, doesn't like life insurance, or B, is not insurable, this is what traditionally people are putting themselves into. But let's go back to, let's say at age 40 here, you look all the way to the left and you find the number 40, go all the way to the right, and you say, hey, this client had saved $82,000 and they had a bad day. They got hit by a bus or passed away like my friend did this week, right? If that happens, that's all that the family has for college. Let's look at an alternative, uninterrupted compounding of cash value life insurance. So now I want you to see here that this first column here is a premium outlay. Notice that the first number, year one, is a little bit higher. I'm not going to get overly complex here, but I had to put a little bit more money in the account in the first year. Instead of putting in $33.33, I had to put in $42.32, but I've accounted for it at the end. Basically, I put in $875 extra because we're always trying to buy the least amount of death benefit that the IRS will allow this to perform. But now what I want you to see is I did the exact same thing. I had $60,000 come out of the contract, and notice that the death benefit the year before was $760. We pulled out this $60, but because there's a growth rate on the account, it's not coming out of the account. We are not borrowing money from ourselves. We're borrowing money from the insurance company against the death benefit. This is why it grows and is accessible tax-free. So the next year, $730. If anywhere in this process, the student, the family, the insured passes away, their student's still going to college, right? Now, the second year, we pulled out the 60 grand, and then you see that the death benefit went down, and then 60 grand, the death benefit went down, and the last year college is funded, and notice that in this example, I still got 160 grand payable to that the family can use for anything now and into the future, whether it be for retirement. Now, maybe I'm not as good as the 176 and the 529, but I still got $606,000 of death benefit. Now we fast forward in this example, the insured is now 60, and they still got $220,000 growing and compounding because I haven't interrupted compounding. This is the amount of money that they could use at some point in the future while still having a death benefit. And they're only paying for $200,000 of death benefit. I know this is a lot of information. Go back and watch the recording of this. It'll make a little bit more sense, but I want to wrap this up. If in a 529, I use TD Ameritrade, depending on how old the student is, will determine the investment strategy. And their plan is that you can turn around the closer you get to retirement, the closer you get to college, they're going to dial back the risk level. But we've talked about this before, that systematic risk, you cannot diversify against systematic risk. So if an earthquake just hit New Jersey here this week, nobody expects that, but it doesn't matter whether you live in Newark or in Camden, that we're going to feel that regardless, right? So that's systematic risk. Folks, I hope this made sense. Whether this applies to you or not, if you have somebody that has students that have aspirations to go into college someday, don't keep us a secret. If the advisor that invited you on the call today, you have questions for, circle back with that advisor to help you to understand your specific dynamics. The last thing I want to say is that you cannot make decisions for college in a vacuum. Everybody's circumstances are different, and you have to understand the rules to be able to not pay retail, but actually get discounts at these colleges along the way. So regardless of whether it's for you and your family specific, or you have a colleague or somebody you work with, somebody that you shouldn't be introducing us to, my advice to you is don't keep us a secret. Chris Lester, I hope you have a great day. I'll see you next week, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.